Neuroplasticity is basically having an understanding that it doesn't have to be that way. Some people are like, I can't do this. And you say, but if other people can, why can't you?
Yeah.
And so you start challenging that individual, you start challenging the thought, because if it's done, and if it's done regularly by someone else, then what makes those people successful? What makes you feel that you can't do that? And that expansive nature, you start building this other one, not the one that you've been looping over here. You start building this new idea. And it really is about elimination of fears. A lot of people don't realize that's the underlying issue. It's a misperception of threat.
All right. Welcome back to the Why Do I Suck as a Real Estate Agent podcast. Today, we got a really special guest. We always have special guests, but today, this guy's a little bit extra special to me. We have Brad Bordini. Brad is our life coach here and personal development coach, business coach, and kind of doer of all things when it comes to our brains here. I call him a brain wizard. But Brad's been studying us, helping us for the last 2.5 years. And Brad's a psychotherapist, life coach, co-leader of programs like Simply Kerry. He's got 2 decades of experience in inpatient, outpatient mental health care, holds a master's in clinical social work, trained in marriage and family therapy, applies neuropsychology-informed strategies to support individuals, families, organizations, and leaders. Brad, welcome to the podcast. That was a whole mouthful. I can't believe I got that out.
That was perfect. It was great. I love it. Thank you.
All right, man. I love it. I love it. I always like to get into the backstory of real estate when I have people on the podcast. But in your case, my journey started with you. Really was about when I opened my brokerage. I just wanted somebody with 1,000, 10,000 foot view on this. But tell people a little bit about how we got connected and then what you've seen so far in 2.5 years of studying mostly new agents. And certainly I was a new broker.
Yeah, I think we initially connected with, Kerry came in and did some work with you guys, and then I came in, started doing some talks to the group, and then we expanded that into kind of individual work and group work. And what I've seen over time, there's peaks and valleys with any business, and we work with numerous businesses, different types, and what is growing pains. And when things get difficult, it's looking at what are the coping strategies, what are the ways in which you keep getting up. There's Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point in a lot of his work. It's this moment where it's, do you give up or do you not? And to credit you very much, you experienced great success, you experienced stress at times, which is to be expected. There were things that came out of left field, right? And what I watched was you rally, and then your leadership helped rally the rest of the group, and it's been so much fun in the fact that I think you in particular, but a lot of the group really liked the neuroscience, learning about how does the brain work, what happens, and in that process, everybody learned a lot more about themselves, and then you create this cohesiveness within the group, and that's what's great about the Take Action group. It's any given minute you can come in. I walk in every time. What do I do every time? Music's playing on my phone, and we're dance my way in, and we have this nostalgic.
You got the 90s hip hop coming in.
Yeah, it's some nostalgic thing. And what's great about it is some places would look at me like I'm insane, and you guys, you get up and dance, and there's this like camaraderie and energy that exists, and that's been a joy to see grow exponentially.
Yeah. So what was it? You spent 2 decades in clinical mental health, so that can't be an easy position. We talked a lot about that in our sessions, and certainly, how did that journey though lead you into coaching professionals and leaders who are struggling to get out of their own way? And I think that's a lot of the business. I've noticed it myself is the self-sabotaging, or I see a lot of agents, especially agents in their first year, 2 years, where they just can't get out of their own way. They have the potential to be very successful, and then they either get trapped too early or they just self-sabotage themselves. How do you help those that are really in that struggle from what you saw in the past with you were clinical and now you're in the professional environment?
Yeah, it's interesting, some of those parallels. Obviously, in the clinical setting, we're looking at pathological levels of things. I'm not working with a lot of business people that have schizophrenia, let's say. So obviously, it's working with people that have more stability and general function that exceeds that of some of the clientele I work with. That being said, many of the people that I worked with historically in the clinical setting were very high functioning, successful people. And so there's interesting parallels that exist between kind of the life coaching and psychotherapeutic models. And that's debated. It's quite an interesting debate. We don't need to go there right now. But
Right.
Point being is there's a lot of overlap. And so a lot of what I do is I remove the stigma associated with addressing mental function and performance. And a huge part of what I do is it's digging in to get people to understand what they're bringing to that moment in time when they're creating their business or whatever position they're in their business. And it's exactly as you're saying. It's like, what limits do they hold in their head that they view as written in stone or law? And then what we do is we change that. We stop and look at it and say, is that really true? And let's break that down. And a little bit of what we have to do is we have to understand how that's formed in the brain, because Freud talked about basically the pleasure principle, which is basically what we want is we always want pleasure and we want to avoid pain. And so the natural tendency for people is when the brain starts catching, the nervous system, the limbic system starts catching perception of threat or danger because it looks like something that hurt you in the past, or it's quite obvious. You poll 100 people, they'd say, yeah, very clearly this is dangerous. When that happens, there's a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. The last one, a lot of people don't know. That's basically catering to anyone's needs or wants. When you're looking at leadership, when you're looking at business expansion, a lot of what you have to do, real estate's really difficult for that because it's you versus everything. It's not like you have something coming down the pipeline, like here you go, and you just move it along the factory line and it's set in stone. It's not clear. How do you get people to buy? How do you get people to trust you? And the first part is if you don't trust yourself as an agent, or to be honest with you, any job that I work with, if you don't trust yourself or believe in yourself, you're already one or two steps down from where you need to be. Right. So that's a huge part of what we do.
For sure. And this industry is super high stress. It ebbs and flows, and the wins are a lot further apart than the losses, especially early on. Once you get to a certain point, and if you do things the right way and structure your business, set it up in the beginning the way that it should be, that there's a carryover effect that you don't realize. And some of the seeds I planted 3 or 4 years ago are growing now versus you don't get that instant gratification. We talk a lot about the dopamine hits and my early on in my life abandonment issues with friends, and certainly things like that come up quite a bit. So obviously everybody has shit from their past. Every single person does. And I think the thing I learned from you is the sooner you can come to peace with that, the faster you're going to grow in this industry. And you don't realize how much that your day-to-day catches up from your past. And that's the thing. So when you're looking at high stress, commission only industries that have massive failure rates, and in real estate, it's like an 87% failure rate after up to 5 years. If 13% of agents make it further than 5 years, which is crazy to me. So what parallels do you see between failing sales professionals and then the clients that you've worked with in the past as well?
Yeah, I mean,
I think, even the professionals that you work with currently.
What's interesting is and you're pointing to this, regardless of what the job is itself, right? Everybody is constantly in a battle with themselves, if you will. In other words, anytime that we agree or set a goal for ourselves, there's a motivation behind it, right? And whether that's just survival from an income perspective or because you want to become at this level or higher level, whatever it is. As you said, dopamine that's the neurotransmitter that's responsible for motivation. It's what keeps you moving, right? And so what's interesting, as you said about your field specifically, is that it doesn't give you that hit as frequently, so you have that spaced out. And it's kind of like, why do you have, for any corporate, you have every 2 weeks you get paid, that sort of thing. Because if you space it too far out, then motivation starts dwindling. If you do it too quickly, it dwindles as well. Because industrial revolution, you'd be paid by the day, that sort of thing. And so we don't do that anymore because we understand this has been studied long enough. So what's interesting is with any professional, that's an interesting term in itself. Whether I'm a teacher, whether I'm doing real estate, whether I'm running a pharmaceutical company, the point is, it's whatever your job is your profession. And so when you look at those issues of motivation, everybody brings something. Everybody's got a bag that they're dragging along with them. And the more introspection you do, the more self-awareness, So that mindfulness practice is huge, because otherwise you're reacting from an impulsive perspective, and oftentimes you're flooded, or you're in an angered state, or whatever it is, and you're not using the frontal lobes. This is problem solving, decision making, logical thinking and stuff. When we're under stress, we're not here as much. We start moving back in the brain, and that's where we're getting more and more. And so rage comes a Hulk, or we shut down and we get sad and cry. So however you coped with stress in the past, that comes forward regardless of whatever your profession is. And so it's all about getting to know yourself in that internal function and dialogue.
Right. And you were there from really the beginning of this idea of why do I suck as a real estate agent? And the idea wasn't necessarily to like have a negative connotation on the podcast. It was really to have somebody come and look at this podcast or the book that we're writing, and then just saying, hey, this is the mindset. I'm a big mindset guy. Obviously, you know that. And you have to be gritty, and you have to have all of the things that we talk about on this podcast day in and day out. But generally it's because the habits suck for those agents. Most people are pretty good people, and this job isn't that hard if they are consistent with it and stay with it and are curious enough to ask enough questions and be patient for their growth. But generally one of those three things are off. So from a neuropsych perspective, what's actually happening to the brain when they get stuck in a repetitive loop or self-sabotaging behavior?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes it's rooted in comparison. So if they've had a job before that was paying them regularly, or they were patted on the back for things, you're not getting a lot of praise. You're not getting those hits of positive, if you will. And so a lot of times what happens is, without realizing it, they're forming habits, and those habits oftentimes can be distraction. It's the fact that you're not showing up for a 9 to 5 where you have a supervisor, they're monitoring you in some capacity. Let's say, I'm just going to look at an independent agent. Basically, they're responsible for themselves and their time management. And so they form habits where you don't have to be somewhere. And so really what we're looking at is trying to change from habit stacking. Like a neuroscience hack is called habit stacking. It's basically figuring out how, when you're doing one thing, can you do another thing to keep you down that pathway of success, what your goal is. And unfortunately, some people don't want to sit and analyze that. They don't want to look at what they do wrong, and they want to also feel a sense of control and success. And so there can be a lot of denial. I've sat with people in various professions, and they're like, everything's fine. And I'm like, you're sweating. I'm like, it's not fine. Like, you're in pain almost from whatever it is you're going through. And that's almost a survival instinct. And so a huge component of what has to happen is there has to be a realistic conversation with self, to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing? Am I really utilizing my time? And so I do that mathematically with people sometimes. I'm like, walk me through your week. Tell me how many hours you did X, Y, and Z. And it's funny because sometimes, like, I've worked with agents before. I've talked to you about this. I've worked with agents, and it came down to 3 hours a week. Maybe they were working on something, and I'm going, how do you think you're going to outperform or outshine or even be recognized if you're spending 3 hours at whatever your craft is? So yeah,
it's huge. And we just started talking a lot about this in the last month, about neuroplasticity. And if somebody is being lazy, maybe they are working 3 to 5 hours a week, or they have other things going on, other priorities, we'll quote unquote other priorities. If you have other priorities and you want to make this your main career, then it's not your main career. But how can somebody literally rewire their brain to start producing at a high level? I know, we talked about neuroplasticity, but let's I don't know enough about it yet, but that's like the common theme that we've had with our brokerage the last month or so.
Yeah, neuroplasticity it's an interesting concept and term. It's been around for a while, but really what it is, it's understanding that we have an experience or a belief. So sometimes it's rooted in factual, or sometimes it's just created in the brain. And that can be about self or the world around us, or the relationship between self and the world around you. And so the way that I look at it is it's the more that you go round and round, like wrapping it, you wrap this idea, and it becomes insulated and protected, and that's what's truth. That becomes the law. And neuroplasticity is basically having an understanding that it doesn't have to be that way. Some people are like, I can't do this. And you say, but if other people can, why can't you?
Yeah.
And so you start challenging that individual, you start challenging the thought, because if it's done, and if it's done regularly by someone else, then what makes those people successful? What makes you feel that you can't do that? And that expansive nature, you start building this other one, not the one that you've been looping over here. You start building this new idea. And it really is about elimination of fears. A lot of people don't realize that's the underlying issue. It's a misperception of threat. And that's the most common things that I deal with, regardless of if I was talking clinical setting or in life coach setting. It's the idea of how we manage stress. And stress is predicated by how you perceive things. So in other words, what one person says, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, I've got to shovel 3 yards of this dirt. Whereas someone else is, I'm getting my exercise and I'm out in the sun. It's just a thought. Either way, it's a physical motion. There's a demand that has to happen for success. And neuroplasticity is about trying to break down what was perceived as law, as factual, and teaching people that is not how it is and that is not how it has to be. And then it's identifying, and this is what's really fascinating, and we've talked about this before, it's say the thing. Say the thing that you want to believe and make that become real. And it's interesting because some people don't want to do it out of fear, because then once you voice it, then it's out there, and then you have to deal with the fact that either you're going to pursue it and make it happen, or you're going to go back. I reference in philosophy what's called Plato's cave. It's this idea of you can wake up to the idea of what it is that could be, and be out in the light, come out of the cave and be out in the light and experience that, or you can go back in the cave and pretend that isn't an option, if you will. That always stuck with me for a long time. I just love that idea of Plato's cave of we do that quite frequently as humans. We avoid because of the fears, and we need to stay out in the light. We need to pursue those things. That's neuroplasticity, is changing the idea, reinforcing it. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's the main reason, quite honestly, in my professional career, I named my brokerage Take Action Realty Group, is hypocritical. I see so much hypocriticism in this industry, and people talk about it and don't do. And so if if I name my company this, then I don't have a choice. I have to go and do it. Sometimes to a default, as maybe a little bit now, but that was the biggest thing for me and why I named it that. I didn't want to have my name on the brokerage. I didn't want it to be all about me. I wanted it to be about action and taking care of clients. And so that's the reason why Take Action Realty Group is named that.
That's it. It's fascinating because when my wife and I work together with people, she loves that stage of it. I'm great at I can do it all the way across. I love it, but she gets so fired up about the action component. And she's right. Yeah. You can analyze anything. You can sit and wallow in self-pity. And I'm not meaning that to be negative, but that's what we do as humans. At times we just sit in it. And that's what my wife does. She's just action. Everything has to be action. And so I found it quite refreshing. Your title, I was like, oh yeah, that's brilliant, because that's exactly what it is. Let's go do it. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So another massive reason why agents fail in this industry is just the fear of rejection. They're terrified to pick up the phone, knock the doors. And again, I don't do a lot of door knocking or teach my agents to do that, especially nowadays with, who knows, somebody shoot a gun through a door or something like that. But not to scare anybody from doing it. But so clinically speaking, how does anxiety hijack our nervous systems? You touched on it a little bit earlier, and stop us from executing our everyday tasks.
The nervous system, it's that reinforcement that's happened historically. And what's fascinating is some people like ideas of jobs. They like ideas of that. They may see someone who's really successful at real estate and be like, that's what I want. I want to have this car, this house, or this prestige, or whatever it is. And as we said before, with washout rates, as you were referencing, that's not what it is for everybody. And it depends on your market. And I told you I was in Florida, and I'm like, every waiter or every person we came across, you could throw a stone and it was a real estate agent. So you have to look at it from a realistic perspective, but regarding what your success could be. But the individuals that have anxiety, some people really struggle with, how do I communicate? Putting myself out there. In other words, I'm going to do posts on social media. I'm going to go host an open house. And if they come into this scenario with limitations regarding social skills, it's kind of a social anxiety, or that fear of failure, everything's run through that filter. And what you have to do is you have to stop and recognize, how did that filter become reinforced throughout life? Was it messages from parents or whoever led you in life? Was it you tried stuff and you failed? And you have to come to terms with those things. And that's a lot of the work that we do, is we recognize, where was it rooted? And how can you eliminate that to recognize that this moment in time is not what was happening all those other times? It's different. And if you can recognize in certain individuals, do you have a skill set deficiency that needs to be worked on? And if you come in with the belief that you can't change, in other words, things are locked, you won't, and you'll just keep building it. There's an old Cherokee tale that basically says a grandfather's talking to his grandson, and there's two wolves that are fighting inside of all of us, if you will, the good and the bad. And the grandson says to the grandfather, which one lives? And he says, whichever one you feed. And so the point is, that's the idea when we look at people's self-limitation and their perception of anxiety, the perception that leads to anxiety, because it's not real. If you see people running around and screaming, that's not anxiety. That's fear. Something is actually happening. Bears chasing them. That's real.
Yeah.
That's go for cover. But if nobody else is running around screaming and you're feeling internal unrest where you want to scream, that's a you thing. And that's what you got to look at and be real and work on deconstructing.
Yeah, and how can they, just a couple of simple steps, how can they get through that?
Yeah, initial components to it is you sit and write about it. You have to reflect. A lot of people I work with don't always like to write, and it's there you go. But you do a great job. I'm kidding. I'm just teasing a little bit.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, but writing it out, it's an interesting thing that happens because you're using your hands, and hands are so interesting from a neural perspective. And I don't want to go too far in that tangent, but the key is when you're utilizing your hands and you're writing that out, and you're putting it in paper, it's something that's etched there. Your brain processes it differently. It slows down thought. And so what you do is you're writing down, what is happening for me? What is the belief that I'm holding about this? What danger exists? When did I experience this before? When I experienced something like it? And so you start tapping into, where did I learn this? Because think about it, little kids will just jump right off the pier, like into water. They don't care. They have no fear at all. I was in Mexico once, and my friend Chichi down there, he has a pet shark on the reef. Strange story, I know. But so we dive in, he goes down like
We're
this.
Talk about that at another time.
Yeah, this shark comes up, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So he's been feeding the shark. And I'm looking at Chichi, and I've known for years, and I look at Chichi, I'm like, what are you doing? There's a shark. And my son looks at me, and Chichi's like, yeah, go ahead and grab him. You can swim with him and everything. My son looks at me, I have fear, but I didn't want to instill that in him. So he said, can I do that, Dad? And I said, yeah, go ahead and grab him. And so my son went swimming with the shark, and then I did it too, and I realized there's no danger. It's okay, there's danger,
Right.
But that's life. There's always some form of danger. So you have to be aware of your environment, but you need to change that perception. In other words, is this actually going to kill me? Is this going to ruin my career? So a lot of it's a mindfulness practice. John Kabat-Zinn talked about that from the 70s on, a fascinating man that talks about mindfulness practice. And you can reduce your stress by paying attention and being aware of the fact that what you think is actually going to destroy you, majority of the time it isn't. It's not at all. In fact, it's not even happening. So that kind of a dose of realism is a great way to summarize it.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, don't go out in the shark-infested waters while they're being chummed and swim with the sharks.
I would concur. Yes, please don't do that. Yeah.
All of a sudden, we have a bunch of real estate agents that lose their arms now.
What was that guy's name on that podcast? We got to call him.
Yeah, he sucks, all right. All right, so with that being said, one of the other big issues we have, and this is a huge issue for me, is shiny object syndrome. Chasing things, trying to get the quick. We touched on dopamine, trying to get the easy, quick wins instead of consistent work, which I've gotten significantly better at over time. But how does our modern attention span, we're scrolling, we're texting, we want all answers in 10 seconds, or we're moving on to the next video, how does that sabotage long-term momentum?
If you think about it, you're doing immediate gratification, your phones, everything, the devices that we have, all that stuff has been researched. That's why you get pings on your phone and stuff. That's Palo Alto, like the Silicon Valley. They figured that out. They consulted with people like me and neuroscience and neuropsychology to learn how to do that. And so the addictive nature and the usage of that on a consistent basis actually has created, to nerd out for a second, has created demyelination of the neurons. So basically, electricity doesn't flow as well anymore in the brain, and it shrinks gray matter. And so one thing, to be very frank, is limit your usage. In other words, spend time with people, spend time in nature, spend time moving your body to compensate for that. That's a huge component to it. You want to improve your attention, exercise, get your heart rate up. There's a whole formula for it. Take the number 220 minus your age, multiply that by 0.6. That's your low heart rate. Get your low heart rate up at that level and keep it at that level or higher for 30 minutes. You're going to release tons of chemicals in your brain, including brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is more of a hormone, but what it does is that improves your attention span. So that's one component to it, is looking at how do I care for the machine, right? To be very clear, there's that. The second part is understanding you have to create kind of a discipline for yourself. So pay attention to what are those distractions. I'm a musician. My wife used to say, why don't we put a guitar in every room? I'm like, I will never get anything done. Nobody will talk to me because every room I walk in, I'll pick up my guitar and play it. So understand there has to be a time and place for everything. And so you figure out what's blocking you, and that's a mindfulness practice again. What's blocking you, what's distracting you, if you will. And then understand you have to set your goals, and you have to look at what does it realistically take for me to achieve those things. And then you build that. And we've talked about that. Shiny thing and expansive, like it comes down to mathematics regarding your time management. It comes down to mathematics if you're purchasing homes, if you're doing flips, if you're taking things on, you have to pay attention to what is the math? What is it that I need to cover the overhead, but at the same time not being too cautious because then there's no gain. You can invest all your money in CDs. I don't think that's a great way to invest your money. 4% return, maybe for short term, but point being is if you want to make money faster or whatever, then you got to do it differently. But success is a lot of it is based on that mindfulness practice.
Yeah, for sure. And being mindful, again, another thing to look at is a burnout. This industry has a really high burnout rate. It glorifies the 24/7 grind. And what are some actual red flags that agents are hitting clinical burnout? I've been close a couple of times. I think you've noticed it, but rather hitting clinical burnout versus success versus hitting your goals and just needing a weekend off. How do you recognize that?
Yeah. If your family or loved ones or friends or anything have been so accustomed to you constantly on your phone, or you're never available, you're never home, you're never present, you have a problem with boundaries. I understand availability is relative to all careers. If you're, neurosurgeon, and you're on call, you can't just be like, I'm not doing that. But understand, even them, you're not on call all the time. And you take a vacation and you do. So you have to build those things in. And as I said, a huge part of burnout is when you have massive agitation or irritability, very short fuse. If you have developed almost a hatred for what you do on a daily basis, if you're frustrated with all the people that you're working with, these are signs. These are very clear signs that you're moving towards burnout. If you're physically ill, if you're in fatigue, if you start gaining a lot of weight, these are signs where you're doing quick fixes, where you're grabbing food that's easily accessible, it's carb-based, it's sugar-based, you're doing drinks that are like that, you're abusing substances, or you're so tired that literally the moment, like you're sitting and eating and almost like the little kid falling asleep with your face in the mashed potatoes. Yeah. Those are a lot of signs that you're having that problem, and that's real. That's really inflammatory response in the body, and I don't have to go all the way down that, but it's paying attention to those things. I think checking in with people too, asking them, how have I been? How do you think I'm doing? To be frank, working with somebody like me, and a little plug, shameless plug, but you stop and look at it. It's on a longitudinal level, life coaching has been showed per research to give a 7-fold return on a long term. In other words, it's fascinating what that difference can be when you're utilizing that help. I've done that. I've utilized help from externals, and having been a practitioner of it for a long time, but not utilizing it, going through my cancer journey and stuff, I reached out and did that. Doing that, I'm like, I can't believe how much more room I have to handle things because you're not holding everything, so you learn to expel it. Yeah.
And I think you become more efficient too. That's like, this business is about efficiency. The more things you can knock out in a very short period of time, the more money you're going to make, the faster you're going to create it, and then you do have time to establish those boundaries. And some of the best agents in our area and the ones that I've interviewed do an outstanding job of that, and they have their non-negotiables. One of mine is the gym. Like, I got to be at the gym 5 days a week. And that carries into the next question of high achievers maintaining success. And again, this podcast is geared more for those that are struggling. But at some point, I'm hoping that you're going to be a high achiever. How do they maintain their drive without letting personal relationships become collateral damage? And then how does it sidetrack their health too? Because that's something I went down too.
Yeah, I think the general public, not just obviously struggling real estate agents or your young budding real estate agents, if you will, regardless of age, but meaning time in the profession, it's across the board. At the end of the day, what you have to stop and realize is that we're animals. It's no different than the squirrel outside. It's like he's not sitting there going, I've got to get this report done, or I've got to do this open house, so I can't eat right now. Like, the squirrel stops and eats when he needs to. You have to find balance, and you have to understand what is it that is necessary for the machine to work. If you're driving cross country, great, you got all the gasoline in the world. If there's no oil in the machine, it's not going to work. So ultimately, it's looking at how do you fuel yourself. It's what beliefs do you have because that will influence everything. So the beliefs that you have is understanding when do you turn the system off so you don't overheat. And the thing is, you also have to have perseverance, and it's understanding how do you realign things. What do you need to let go of? I told you that a long time ago. I stopped having alcohol because I realized I just don't have room for that anymore in my life. You just go, what do I need? What needs to go? And so you pay attention to what holds you back. What weights are you carrying in your pockets if you're trying to swim across the ocean? It's get rid of it. And so that can be emotional. It can be, and then looking at who do you spend time with? When do you go to sleep? I remember when I was working at the hospital, I would get up so much earlier comparatively, or even in the clinic, I was like one of the first ones in and last to leave. And what I realized was, I need to go to bed earlier because my time changed. That's it. And so sometimes it's simplistic things right in front of you. Oh, if I go in earlier, I probably should go to bed earlier. But we don't want to do that. A lot of times we try to convince ourselves, well, that's my time at night. That's my alone time. That's when I recharge. I'm like, that's when you should be sleeping. I think it's taking a look. Per individual is taking a look and saying, what is it that is working? What is not working? And how do I mainstream that? And if I don't know, then where do I get help? And we've talked about that mentorship, life coaching, and if it's pathological levels even, obviously, go see a licensed clinician.
Yep, 100%. And then looking ahead now, we have a lot of things coming down the pipeline. AI is just a figment of, it's going to be part of our daily lives. That's right. It already is. Right. So the real estate market's going to get tougher probably. It's going to shift. Barriers are going to change. How important is it for those that are possibly, they could be using it, they couldn't be, but just understanding the psychological intelligence, human intelligence, paying attention to human behavior versus just simply knowing how to write a contract? How important is that going to be in our industry?
Yeah, I think really what you're talking about with real estate is how you connect with people. It's your personality. It's your willingness to be open and connect and spend time with people and get to know them and figure out what do they need and how can you help them. And what's interesting is a lot of people have discussed this in different facets regarding the expansive nature of AI and how it is negatively impacting human positions. I was talking to a guy that was in graphic design. He's like, I'm done. He said, I went to school for that. I've had a great career. It's gone completely. And so when you look at it, really what you have to understand is at some point people will also tip the other way, and they're going to want people. They're going to want those interactions. I understand saving a buck is one thing, but the key to it is you bring the best version of yourself. And if you operate from a position of fear that I will be obsolete, then you're going to operate in your daily from that fear-based disposition.
You're going to be obsolete.
Yes. Yeah, you'll take yourself out of the game. Instead, just exist, just be happy in the moment. And one of the things that people say is, but what would I do then? I'm like, I don't know. You didn't come out of the womb as a real estate agent. So I'm pretty sure you can reinvent yourself. And that's what we've been talking about, is that locked mindset at times. What would I do? And again, AI can be very helpful. We've talked about that. It can be very helpful. But there's something about that human connection. And I think that when you're looking at buying a home, it's one of the biggest investments people make, families can make. And having someone to talk to and bounce ideas off of, I think a huge thing that I would say is make sure you're asking questions. Say, what questions do you have? How can I help you more? Don't be afraid to reach out and just keep letting me know what you need. It's that sense of reassurance and connection that will keep you in the game.
Yep. Agreed. And as we wrap this up, obviously you've meant a lot to me personally and our business, but when we have this concept of why do I suck as a real estate agent, and that's really the whole thing was pointed towards a mental trigger for somebody to realize, hey, if they can at least ask themselves that question, why am I sucking right now? There's at least some self-accountability to it. So going into that and changing and maybe realizing that it's not that they suck, they just haven't changed their behaviors the right way or their habits the right way yet. So what's the first step from your perspective that they can take tomorrow or today and turn it around?
To follow off of what you were just leading with, it's recognition of self-deprecating behaviors, self-attacks, and instead just realize it's just something that happened. In other words, if you're like, oh, I totally forgot to call that person, I suck. No, you don't suck. You forgot something. That's it. That's the change. And you start going moment to moment and realize for every one moment, I tell people this all the time, if I told you 99 positive things and somewhere in that mix I throw in one negative, so 100 bits of information are coming to you, what do you focus on? The negative. That's how we're wired. It's a survival instinct that whatever makes me vulnerable, that's what I need to focus on. But the reality is, basically with the invention of gunpowder and us having thumbs, but that expansive nature of control, we're higher on the food chain. So we're okay for the most part. We don't have to worry about saber-toothed tigers getting us right now. Don't go swimming with the sharks, as we covered before, but unless you like that. But point being is, I think it's seeing what are those messages of self-deprecating messages that I repeat in my head, and then ask yourself, is that really true? Is this really what's happening right now? And I think that if most people don't spend any time really thinking, what do I think on a daily basis? And so spending time evaluating that and realizing, do I really believe that? Is there proof here? If we polled 100 people, would they all agree with this right now? Like survey says, 99 said, yep, you suck. Okay, then maybe that's not your profession. Find something else. That's the other thing, be realistic. But to be honest with you, let yourself grow, because if you think about the best neurosurgeon, brain surgeon on the planet, at one point was a child and didn't know anything about anything. Like literally knew nothing coming out of the womb. And so whatever profession it is, you have to understand there needs to be time to grow into it. And you can't really do that if you're constantly focusing on self-deprecation, because to be honest with you, self-deprecation is actually a means of protection. It's a defense mechanism. And so literally you're back to the one, not the 99 great things you do. You got to see the greatness that exists. A lot of people have been taught, don't do that, it's egotistical. I go, no, you have to have a belief in yourself. You have to see the greatness in yourself. The difference is, don't say I'm better than. Don't go into comparison. I think it was Roosevelt said comparison is the thief of all joy. Yeah, stay away from that. I'm not talking about that. Don't say you're better than someone, but say I'm pretty darn good at what I do, or I'm going to be good at this, and then keep feeding and figure out what do I need to do to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Brad, as we wrap this up, for those out there, I know you have a really crammed schedule. If you're taking any more coaching, you're obviously pretty good at helping real estate agents get through their shit. How can somebody reach out and find you?
Yeah, basically I've got social media stuff. We are at simplykerry.com. Kerry is Kerry, so simplykerry.com. There's an intake form. It basically says on a drop-down menu, how do I work with Brad? I think some of the data needs to be updated. Sorry about that. We realized that the other day. Prices, times, all that sort of stuff is probably a little bit off. But there's a little intake form that you can fill out. If you want, you can also reach out on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and then I can send you that link. But by all means, and have like a waiting list for people, but I'm very much interested. If anybody wants to work with me, I try to find a way to make that happen. Okay?
Love it. All right, man. As always, appreciate you. Thank you for everything you've done for us, for me. And that was the Why Do I Suck as a Real Estate Agent podcast. And our guest was Brad Bordini. So Brad, thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thanks, buddy.
All right, man. We'll see you. So that's a wrap here on the Why Do I Suck as a Real Estate Agent podcast. Thank you so much for spending time with me and our guests. The people you hear on the show really aren't guessing. They've been doing the work. They've been doing it for a long time. They're sharing their behaviors, their habits, their successes, their systems that actually lead to real work, real success. So please subscribe and follow so you don't miss the next conversation. Until next time, remember, you don't suck. You're learning. It's the beginning, or maybe you're in a rut, but you don't suck. So make a few changes, stay curious, stay consistent, and please keep coming back.